Okay, so we spent some time on that first question, who am I? Now, the second question we're looking at is, who is God? This is, for some people, obscure, and we do benefit from reading about other people's search for God and uh, journey to knowing God because it's always moving. You know, you're not standing still. No, when people say, I know God and that's it and I'm finished, okay, that's like a rigid. That proves that they actually don't because they're changing all the time and conditions are changing all around them. And God, who is love, is adapting to conditions all the time for his people on earth. And so it's, it's in motion. It's not static. Your relationship with God has to be moving. Now, people call God different things and think of him different ways. But I'll tell you, for me, it was in the 20s where I had my most important wondering about. I grew up as a Catholic. Then, of course, I had an early divorce. I was a single parent, but I knew God understood me. I always knew that. I never had any questions about any of that, which stood to me. That stood to me when I needed it. It was there. It was all there in depth and richness, and it helped me. It drew me through some tough days, and my identity seeking included that spirit, which was fabulous. But anyway, as I looked at our Catholic Church, I didn't fit anywhere from what I could see. I didn't find any place or group where I thought, oh, I want to be like them. I just didn't. But what I started looking at was St. Francis of Assisi. And he was all about joy, all about simplicity. It wasn't complicated for him. And that's how I felt about it. And I still feel it wasn't complicated for me. Long story short, as I got to know Francis, I got to know God. And the fact that God loved St. Francis enough to act in his life in these phenomenal ways reassured me that I could be exactly who I was and God would love me just like that. So I became a Franciscan. I professed about the age of 29, I think. And then after that, I met my husband and was married, and it was a great match because I knew exactly who I was and he knew who he was. And we knew that the other person was like us, similar, and wanted the same things and would approach life in the same way, in simplicity and with love. So that's how my journey went. Okay, so I'll tell you about another journey, a little more complicated. So there was a woman with autism, and she was farm stock, like my husband's a farmer, so I'm married to a farmer, and I understand when people say that. It just means farm people. It's can be just a way of thinking. And she understood, she studied, she was brilliant. But the one thing that confounded her was she would say, I understood everything but God. So she would go to church with her mother and she would stare at the people. She'd put her back to I think they were Lutheran, back to the action, and she would look at the people and how they appeared to be experiencing God. And she just didn't get it. It mystified her. And she gave up on it because she thought, it's not for me. I haven't got a clue what they're doing, why they're doing it, and why they seem to be so peaceful afterwards and so happy. She said, it's just not for me, but it made her sad. Anyway, she looked at animals, particularly beef cattle, and how they were slaughtered. And she used to lay on the grass so she would have the experience of the animals. She really studied them, and she loved them and respected them. And so she developed a way for their end of life moments. She thought, we're rushing them in. They're scared to death. It's not right. They're so good to us. They give us so much. They give us meat and food. They trust us. We are wrong to make their last moments be so terrifying. So she developed a way of, assembling them and rounding them up and into the place where they would get an electric jolt, and that's how they would be slaughtered for production. So again, she had her hand in every tiny bit of this, her whole body. And she, at the one moment she was there and she had her hand on the animal when the electric shock went in, and she said, she felt the spirit go out of him. And she said, and I knew God. I understood God. When I felt the spirit go out through my hand, I knew everything there was to know about God, and suddenly I understood. And she said, I was glad I was doing what I was doing, because her immense gratitude for the animals was pleasing to God. So her story, her journey of getting to know God was different than mine. Now, I talked in a prior podcast about the experience of the young man who went to see Mother Teresa and ultimately found God and himself in the plight of the poorest of the poor. That's how he discovered the nature of God. Mother Teresa herself felt God's calling when she was in India and saw people dying on the streets unloved. She left her order, which was radical. She's leaving her order. Some would say she was disobedient. I mean, she would have been subjected to the most cruel distortions for doing what? What God wanted her to do. People should not be judging others. They shouldn't. They can't. It's absurd. So she said, I meet God in the distressing disguise of the poor, and I see Christ in the distressing disguise of every poor person. So Mother found God in the poor people, in their faces. Okay, there was a young woman in her 20s, drinking, partying, had a boyfriend who wasn't very good to her at all, and thought, well, what are you going to do? This is as good as it gets. I mean, she was settling, obviously, for a relationship that wasn't good enough for her. And he needed to find himself too, and so that he could offer something better to a woman. At 23, by 23, she was disillusioned, had had enough, and thought, this is wildly depressing. Wildly depressing. Is this all there is? Is this it for me? Marry someone I don't really like who's not very nice to me. It just seemed awful. So she had a thought of her grandmother, who was a praying woman, and she took herself to a church and sat there. And she would say, well, I didn't pray. I didn't know how to pray. I just sat. And she said, I wanted to go somewhere where I could hear my own thoughts. Now, listen to that. Hear my own thoughts. My friends, it's going so fast for us that other than those racing, intrusive thoughts, we might even not know what we really think about life, about money, about people, about dying, about living. I mean, your thoughts are crucial to you. So anyway, what happened? Someone gave her volume 2 from our apostolate, and she said, well, that was my course correction. That was it. I knew exactly where to go, and I knew who Christ was, because she experienced him in that volume. But don't ever be afraid of those moments where you're curled up in a ball in your bed and you're saying, I just wish I was dead. Don't be afraid of those moments. That's coming for everybody. If you haven't experienced it, you will. I'm sorry, but this is what life does to us. There are moments where we say, I can't go on, or I don't want to go on, or what is the point of going on? And you have to remember that I said this, and trust me, we all feel that way. That's a common. It's like loneliness. You think, oh, that person's not lonely. They're in a happy marriage. Well, you think it's happy. Trust me, you don't know. A. B. The worst loneliness is the loneliness people have in marriage or in relationships. It's the worst. So you mightn't be in as bad a shape as you think. And again, you can't compare. You can't compare. It's dangerous and flawed. Your comparison will always be flawed. But don't be afraid to feel that absolute hopelessness, helplessness, disillusionment. It's okay, because it goes up from there. It will, I promise you, it will. Now, what I've just told you there is 4 different ways that people encountered God. They're all different, aren't they? But it's the same God. What they actually discovered was God is love, and God loves me. And guess what? He loves those people too. Maybe I can do a little something about that. Okay? And really, that's where your life begins. Because I promise you, you're a good thing. God created you. You're here for a reason. You have something to do. You have something to do. And you'll know it when you see it. But you got to spend this time figuring it out. So now my question to you is this, and my challenge. Where do you see God? Those people saw him in different places. Your question to answer is, where do I see God? Where in your life do you see something you think God would like? And you see something happen, you say, I think God would like that, because that's love. And you see something happen and say, I don't think God likes that. Can I do anything about it? Maybe not. You're just learning. You're gathering information here. Look in your day. Where is God in my day? Where do I see him in the world? A nice way to do this, because everyone has doubts about God. I mean, you're not alone there. A nice way to do this would be for you to say, what in your life do you think is worthy of God? Is it your studies? Is it your job? Is it the way you treat other people? Is it your attempt to stop drinking too much, spending too much, using porn too much, using people too much, using a substance that's bad for you? Because in that grittiness and imperfection and failures and successes, you're making mistakes, you're being successful, you're making mistakes, you're being successful. God is in all of that. He's in all of that with you. If people get hung up on their mistakes, I would ask you not to. I mean, I know I say this a lot, but like, if you have a mistake, go, boom, back to what I'm trying to do. Mistake, back to what I'm trying to do. Mistake, back to what I'm trying to do. You'll be successful if you keep trying. Who was it, Edison, who invented the light bulb or something? And what he said was, they said, you failed 100 times. I mean, how do you keep going? He said, I didn't fail. I discovered 100 ways it wouldn't work. Now, that's the attitude. That's what you need. How do you find God? Where do you find God? Where do you see God? What might God be like? I've given you a true story when I said God is love. I told you the truth there. So go from there and figure it out from there. Like, what might look like God? What might not? What might people be calling God that you look at it and you say, that can't be God. I mean, this can't be true. You know what I mean? If that's God, I don't want any part of that. Okay, so what you've just said there is, if that's God, I don't want any part of that. That's no problem. But don't pause there. Don't stop. I mean, just say, where do I find God? Where do I think God is? Where do I see something that I think looks like God? You know what I mean? Other people's understandings of God needn't dictate yours. And don't apologize for that. You're you. You're a separate person to anybody else. Your faith, your relationship with God is not going to look like anyone else's. It shouldn't look exactly like someone else's. Okay. I'll tell you about, I met a young Jewish man in Portugal. He was a friend of one of my kids. And he takes young people in their 20s and 30s, mostly Americans, older people too. I was invited to go, but I wasn't like up for the challenge of the, exceptional hiking that was involved. I thought, never me. But, and he takes them out into the Portuguese cliffs, and they hike and they go on maybe 1 day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. And they get to see like magnificent sunsets, sunrises. They're overlooking the sea. Their experiences are profound. And the thing is, if you read about the experiences that they have, their people are changed. These young people's lives are changed because they're going out into silence. And, they have campfires, and I'm sure they have a few drinks and, barbecues, everything you would do when you're camping out somewhere. They have a great time. but they are changed at a deep, deep level. And he said, I don't know why it happens. I'm just taking them out. He's very humble. But what I could see immediately was they were encountering themselves because of the lack of his agenda for them. He had no agenda for them. He was just taking them out. Look what I see and how beautiful it is. And a lot of people find God in nature, and they're dead right. Nature doesn't bash you over the head and tell you what you have to think. It just sits there being marvelous. And you can interact with it in a gentle way. And it's gentle to you, and hopefully, you're gentle to it and respectful of it, and enjoy it in ways that doesn't damage it, That's very important. But I could see that what this young man was doing was spirit-filled for him. He had found God. And when he did find it in that place out there, he thought, other people need this. This is what they need. And so he started this little company, And his parents were great about it because he left a lucrative situation to go hike around Portugal. But I don't think he expected to be who he became or to be affecting people the same way. So as I listened to him tell me about it and the impact on others, I felt the Holy Spirit. The excursions brought people into relationship with themselves and with other people, also having a stripped down experience of nature and the world. It was beautiful. He finds God in creation. Okay. He's not practicing any religion, but he's deeply spiritual. You can feel it from 10 feet from him. Wouldn't it be nice if you had that same peace? That same ability to be detached and yet connected. Because that's where the journey is meant to take us. We detach from the opinions of others, from materialism, from a preoccupation with achievement for achievement's sake, from any kind of social endorsement. We detach from all that. And yet we're connected to the need for people to be loved, fed, safe, have good legal care. And I'm coming back in my mind to Mother Teresa. She had to detach from what everyone in her religious community thought about her, and she detached from what the world thought about her, and what she attached to was what God thought about people dying in the street unloved. So if you're a Christian, you're a New Testament kind of person, look in Scripture. Christ, the answers are there for us. Christ in the New Testament shows us how to be, how to behave, etc. But we're constantly recreating like the Pharisees. And that's humanity. That's what happens. At the same time, you don't have to do that, and I don't have to do that. I can practice the sacramental life and detach from the judgments of the Pharisees or the expectations or the cognitive inflexibility that can come with being a devout anything. You got to stay, the Spirit is in motion. You want to stay in motion in your prayer life and everything else. Christ is looking at, Christ isn't looking at a persona. And that's why people were so affected by him. Because when Christ looked at someone, if they were a leper laying in the dirt, he saw right past that, and he saw their true self. And what happened? They knew they had been seen, and they were like, please, free me from this. You know who I am. Free me from this. I don't want to be this way. And he healed many people. He will heal you, and that's what he does. But don't worry about bringing a persona into prayer. He sees right through it. He doesn't care about money or status or grades or degrees or failures, past failures. Christ is over it. You know, people talk about the sacrament of confession. Some people will not go, even Catholics, they're afraid of it. They've had a bad experience. You know, we would all do well to remember that on the other side of you in the confession is a human being. It's not God. They're mediating God for us, but they're doing that imperfectly. They can only be. A priest is a human being. So the Spirit, the graces that come through the sacraments are perfect. The men are not. Still, many are saintly. Many are not. We got to get over it, you know, and stop expecting something that we're never going to find in humanity. The graces coming through the sacraments are perfect graces. Now, we talk about being yourself in all these places and finding God. I'm going to jump to something relevant in terms of relationships. When you know yourself spiritual, when you know who you are, as the more spiritual you get, the more open to spirit you are, the more you're going to know who you are and know what's not okay for you. The culture and its distorted sexuality has taken a lot of fun out of the man-woman thing or the connection thing. And I would say to you, sometimes you could be doing great in a relationship and then it gets a little intimate. And maybe you see that people complain about this. And then suddenly you feel like, oh, I'm not actually here. This person's playing something out with me sexually. And I could be anyone. I'm feeling objectified. Well, your instincts are good. You need to trust them. If that's how you're feeling, well, then that needs to be said. And you can hit the brakes and say, you know what? I'm feeling a little weird. I'm uncomfortable. I'm unsure. I'm a little freaked out. I don't know what's happening, but it's maybe not for me and I don't want to. The fact that someone has expectations of you has nothing to do with what you're willing to do. Somebody wants me to do this. Well, it has nothing to do with what I'm willing to do. What I'm comfortable with, what I want to do. I've heard young women say it's a freak out because everything's great and it's nice and everything, and then suddenly there's this other thing happening and they get the feeling it's from something the person has watched in pornography. And people will say, well, I go along with it because I don't know what else to do. Well, you say, stop. I don't want to do it. And often the young men are freaked out because they think I'm supposed to be up to that. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. No, it takes all the spontaneity out of it and the delightfulness in each other. It's supposed to be a deepening of your connection. It's not a performance sport. And if it is for some people, it's got nothing to do with me. I don't know anything about it. And I just know talking to young men, they feel a pressure that they don't like, and they feel objectified, and they feel like maybe I should avoid it because I don't want to have to be like this. Or the young woman is bringing something in that's putting pressure on the young man, and he's like, this is not. I don't like what that seems like. I don't like what it looks like, and it feels manufactured. It's being put on. So free yourself of that. I tell you, to young women, I would say, if you say that to a young man very often, you'll take the pressure off him. And he'll feel like, okay, I'm free to just be myself. I don't have to perform here. And in terms of the young men, if you're putting that on a young woman, you know, just because someone is willing doesn't mean you're not hurting her. And so I would remember that, and you don't want that. This isn't for you. We're better than this. We're better than this. If you're addicted to porn, you're not alone, and you can be free. Just use the strategies and the tools that are out there, Google it, and get moving on it. And the images do fade. They do fade, and that's what people say. They even have a day, how long it takes for them to fade. I know men who have overcome this issue. These are fabulous men, amazing men. And they would say, whoa, it just like grabs hold of you by the throat. So, and that is for men and women. Okay, you just don't want to let anyone tell you who you have to be, but God. in God, you don't discover, you discover who you truly are. And that's where your joy comes from. And, I'll tell you some religion, spirituality. Okay. Spirituality tells you, like I said, who you really are. It doesn't tell you who you have to be or have to become. It doesn't ask you to conform. True spirituality urges you to transform, grow, develop to a happier, best you. So you're being asked really to transcend your wounds. Transcend means to come above them, move away from them, to become something better because of them. You want to transcend your mistakes, to move, develop, grow, become someone better because of your mistakes. You don't let life squash you. Someone once told me that. Don't let it squash you. And I thought, good advice. What's better than that? What advice is better than that? So I would say to you that you're a gift to the world. You are a gift from God to every single one of us. You're important, as I said, and you've got work to do. You've got something to become, someone to become, many things to transcend. It's all there for you. I'm excited for you for this. Thank you.